Hi everyone, and now for your marine weather. Starting out with a sea ice edge, we've got not much going on, and we're approaching our seasonal minimum. For tonight's weather, 1,005 millibar low, approaching the Bering Strait with a weakening occluded front across the strait, southerly flow aloft causing a lot of rain. Not a whole lot of wind makers yet, but you can see on the west side of the screen there that there's something coming. Also, we got high pressure offshore, well south of the Panhandle there at 1,023. Then for tomorrow's weather, we've got a low that has developed to about 1,003, but that's the first part of a major system moving in on Friday. 1,005 millibar low over the north slope, lots of rain over the state, 1,002 thermal low over the northwest territories and the Yukon Territory. A weak little low that's not going to amount to much skirting along the southern Gulf, and higher pressure further to the south. For Friday's weather, we have a 991 gale force low that is moving into the Bering Sea, about the central Bering Sea or so, with a full occluded front wrapped around it. There'll be plenty of wind out ahead of it and on the south and the western quadrants as well. High pressure is built over the state, and a little bit of a high out in the Gulf for onshore flow for the sections of southeast Alaska. So let's start with their forecast. Starting out with systems approaching about 20 knots offshore, north off of Yakutat, seas up to about 7 feet. Then a little bit more southerly component as you get further south, and then the wind switches to west, generally a sea breeze onto the southern part of the Panhandle. On the inside waters, 10 to 15 knots, seas up to 3 feet. And then for Friday's forecast, we've got a mixed bunch of directions on the outside, 10 to 15 knots or so, seas up to around 5 feet. More to come on the weekend. And then southerly starting to kick in the northern and central sections, about 15 knots or so, seas up to 3 feet. But northwesterlies 10 knots, still reflecting some of a sea breeze, and seas 2 feet in the southern inside waters. For south central, 20 knots in Prince William Sound and off of the eastern sections, about 15 knots or so, with a little bit of a westerly component in both in Cook Inlet and off of Seward. Plenty of rain, not a whole lot of sea state, about 5 to 6 feet on the outside as you get further east. And then for Friday, still westerlies about 20 knots or so, as high pressure, there's just a little wedge of high pressure out ahead of that system in the Bering Sea. 20 to 15 knots on the outside, 10 knots in Prince William Sound, and about 20 knots in Cook Inlet, generally coming around to southerlies as it just begins to feel that system. And then for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, 10 to 15 knots just about everywhere, with about a westerly component or so. On the Gulf side, you've got seas up to about 4 feet, and on the Bering Sea side, seas about running around 3 feet or so. And then now we start to feel that system coming into the Bering Sea. So 30 knots north of Coal Bay there, 25 knots south of False Pass. Otherwise, 10 to 20 knots or so, with a little bit of a westerly component as you get further east, and seas up to 4 feet on the Gulf side, and about 4 to down to 2 feet in the Bering Sea side. And then for the Aleutian chain, not a whole lot going on Thursday, but you start seeing those southerlies 25 knots out in the western sections, seas ranging up to about 9 feet on the Pacific side, up to 8 feet on the Bering Sea side, and then a variable mix as you get to the central and eastern Aleutians, about 10 to 15 knots or so. But then it really ramps up to gale force as that low moves into the Bering Sea. So a lot of 40s in the eastern sections, generally southwest wind, up to 15 knots, up to 15 feet on the Pacific side, up to 13 feet on the Bering Sea side, and then rounding down a little bit to 30 to 35 knots as you get farther west. But seas are still pretty big, 13 feet on the Pacific side and up to 10 feet on the Bering Sea side. For the western Alaska coastline, 10 to 15 knots, generally a westerly component tomorrow, and it's feeling a little bit of a sea breeze there, about up to 4 feet out by St. Matthew, otherwise about 2 to 3 feet. And then as we get into Friday, starting to feel that gale force 35 knots in the Pribilof, seas 11 feet, coming around to easterlies as we get up by St. Matthew, 25 knots, but 20 to 25 knots along the rest of the west coast and seas around 4 feet. For the Arctic coast, first down through the Bering Strait on Thursday, only about 10 knots or so, and then as you get up to the North Slope, about 10 to 15 knots, seas up to 3 feet. But Friday, you start seeing that southerly component in a lot of the winds, 15 to 20 knots down through the Bering Strait and on up to Cape Lisburne, and then about 10 to 15 knots along the North Slope with a little bit of a westerly component and seas running up to 3 feet. So that's it for your marine forecast. Please let everybody know where you're going boating, and please be safe out there.